10th of January 2018, I was on my way to the Islamabad airport and I was heading to London actually. My taxi was stopped by two vehicles, one in the front and one on the back, forcibly stopped, and armed men came out of the taxi. And they came towards me, and I got out of the taxi to ask what the matter was. At first I thought it was some kind of a road rage issue or some accident that the taxi driver had done that I was not aware of. But they started pointing fingers to me and saying things like, "What do you think of yourself?" And one of them pushed me on the floor, on the road, and the others started to beat me, and they had guns which they were beating me with the butts of their guns. They had automatic weapons, AK-47s, and then they wanted me to go along with them, and while they were saying that, I was trying to resist it, and they kept saying they will shoot you if you don't go with us. And then eventually one of them said that they'll shoot me in the leg if I do not cooperate, and that's when I thought that I should cooperate. I was made to sit back in the taxi that they had overtaken by now and had ejected the driver. While the taxi was about to move, I realized that one of the side doors on the right side, there was nobody on the right side. Amongst the kidnappers, 3 or 4 of them had sat in the car, but none of them were sitting on the right side of me, and there was a door. And I realized that the door was unlocked, and as soon as the taxi was about to take off, I jumped from the door, from the taxi onto the middle of the highway, Islamabad highway, where this incident was ongoing, and I ran as fast as I could, and then eventually managed to go to a police station. Once I reached a police station, I called some friends, journalists of mine, and basically registered an FIR, which is a first information report, and I named the Pakistan Army as a suspect. And the reason why I named the Pakistan Army as a suspect for this abduction and possible assassination was because the Pakistan Army had been threatening me for a number of years before this incident. The Federal Investigation Agency in Pakistan has been calling journalists, activists, and other sort of social media users under cybercrime and counterterrorism charges since the last couple of years. I was one of the first to receive such a notice from the Federal Investigation Authority in which they had asked me to come in and present myself for an investigation under counterterrorism and cybercrime charges. I'd asked them specifically as to what had triggered this investigation, or what would trigger the arrest, and what was the content that was objectionable, which I would have breached any laws for, and they refused to answer that particular sort of query of mine. And then I went into the courts even for that, and basically it turned out that, from what I understood, at the courts I met one of the Federal Investigation Authority's officials who had come to represent the FIA, as it's commonly called, and he told me that this was being done under the direction of the Pakistan military. Now, what was the reason? From what I understood was that this was a reason. The reason was to create this environment of fear and intimidation amongst the journalist community, so to use me and send me this sort of notice. Similarly, other activists, other social media users and journalists have received similar sort of notices. Very recently, Gulalai Ismail, who's a women rights activist from Peshawar city, has had to go through the similar sort of treatment, and she presented herself in front of the Federal Investigation Authority for counterterrorism and cybercrime charges. Her name has been put on an exit control list. She cannot leave the country, and the crimes against her are not being defined, and they're using vague terms as for example, that you've done something anti-national or against the interest of the country, but we do not know specifically. So this has become a new method of this using the FIA to intimidate journalists, to intimidate activists, has become a new method for the Pakistan's authorities to silence dissent. Besides the military critique, there are many red lines or taboos that journalists are not allowed to cover in Pakistan. One of the main topics is religion. For example, critically talking about Islam, or it's criticizing any policies related to Islam can get you into trouble to the extent that you could be prosecuted for blasphemy laws, or you could also be subjected to a mob violence sort of situation, which has happened in the past with people who have criticized Islam in the country, or talked about Islamic policies that are perhaps not in line with human rights values. Very recently, the DGISPR, which is the Military Media Wing's General, Asif Ghafoor, did a press conference in which he said that we want Pakistani journalists, and he emphasized on Pakistani journalists because those are the ones he can control, not the international ones or the ones who work for foreign news outlets. He said Pakistani journalists for the next 6 months should cover only positive stories. Now, we do not know what this positive story means, and positive is such a vague term, but he basically meant that anything that puts any bad light on Pakistan should not be covered. In Pakistan, when journalists get attacked, they get targeted. Some of them have been killed in the past. Some of them I knew personally. There have been investigation commissions that have been set up. The judiciary has been activated. There has been a lot of hue and cry from the government quarters, but eventually all of it dies out and nothing really comes out of these investigations. One of the very famous cases is of Salim Shahzad, who was picked up from Islamabad and his body was dumped 2 days later, killed, and he was dumped, his body was dumped. An investigation commission was set up, very senior journalists were part of it, the judiciary was part of it, independent human rights activists were part of it. Eventually, the commission investigated the case for months and months, and they came out with a report that was never made public. But from what we understand, the report did not blame anyone, the report did not ascertain anything, even though we knew with Salim Shahzad, he had sent emails to Human Rights Watch, to other human rights activist bodies about receiving threats from the military days before his abduction. So eventually, I mean, the courts seem helpless, or are usually party to the military or party to the powerful lobbies in Pakistan that work against freedom of press. Went missing. They used to run satirical pages on Facebook and Twitter where they used to make fun of the military, used to make fun of political issues, and basically one day, subsequently after one each after the other, all of these 4 or 5 bloggers, they went missing. Most of them were recovered after a few weeks, some of them after a few months, and then most of them have escaped from Pakistan and are living in exile in the West. Basically, that was the first time social media came under sort of that kind of a heavy crackdown. And we saw how social media, talking openly on social media was an issue also. Many accounts went silent at that time. After that, people went offline from Twitter, from Facebook. Then as 2017, in the mid of 2017, so this happened early 2017, the case of the missing bloggers. Then middle of 2017, the Federal Investigation Authority was activated against journalists, activists and social media users for maligning the military online, in which I also received a warning and arrest warrants. Then we've also seen that recently, the Karachi Press Club is one of the oldest institutions in the country when it comes to press associations. And very recently, it was raided by intelligence officials and security personnel. And they said that we were in pursuit of some terrorist that was hiding in there, which was later on proven to be false. But this was basically, again, another message that was sent to journalists around the country that no place is safe for them, and wherever the security forces want to come, they will come in. And they went through different rooms, and the journalists, when they tried to ask them if you have a warrant or if there is any kind of any kind of a particular investigation that we can see that you've been following, and the security personnel misbehaved with them, mistreated them, and sort of sent a message that we can do whatever we want, following the same kind of suit, where it has started sending legal notices to users in Pakistan saying that your social media timeline has objectionable content and it's violating Pakistani laws. One such, I received a warning like that too. We've heard of cases in England of the Pakistan embassy being involved in harassing Baloch separatists, for example, here, sending people to their protests here, or trying to control Pakistanis here, or we've also seen similar sort of things happening in the US. Very recently, when I was in Washington DC, some people who appeared at this conference that was of Pakistani dissidents and tried to gate crash it. It was an invite-only conference, and they tried to gate crash it and they filmed the whole event. And in half an hour, that filming that they did of gate crashing and then, you know, shouting at all of us and saying things like you were doing anti-Pakistan stuff, and that particular one-sided sort of coverage of this intervention that they were trying to do was broadcasted on all Pakistani channels, and we were shown as traitors. Very recently, we've now received intelligence reports that I'm not supposed to go into details about, but these are credible intelligence reports that we've received, including me and a few other Pakistani dissidents, in which these intelligence agencies have received credible reports about assassination plots about me, other dissidents, if we ever go back to Pakistan. And we've also been advised not to go to Pakistan-friendly countries and embassies around the world. And the assessment of these intelligence agencies that met us, some of the dissidents, is that after Jamal Khashoggi's killing in Istanbul, who was a Saudi dissident journalist, after his killing, many of these countries like Pakistan and other repressive regimes around the world, they have been emboldened because they see the Saudis getting away. According to a recent survey, 88% of Pakistani journalists resort to self-censorship when they are reporting about any issue, particularly, nothing in particular, but any issue in Pakistan. I mean, there is some advice that I would like to give to these journalists back home. One of the main things that they need to do is that they need to continue talking about these harassments, these threats, and the onslaught they're facing, because if they do not talk about it, then they will be further victims of this particular sort of onslaught.